The teacup slipped from my hand, and before the droplets even hit the floor, her slap had already landed. My daughter-in-law didn't scold, she struck. In front of my son. In front of my grandson. No one stood up for me, so I stood up for myself, and made sure she'd never sit at my table again. Before we begin, may I ask, where in this big, beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The porcelain teapot wobbled as Martha Ellis set it down, her wrist trembling just slightly from age and the weight of the pot. A thin stream of amber liquid sloshed over the rim, dripping onto the polished hardwood floor of the Ellis dining room. The room was warm with the smell of roasted chicken and garlic bread, the chandelier overhead humming faintly. For a split second, the sound of the tea splattering against the floor filled the silence louder than any voice. Sophia's chair scraped back violently against the rug. Martha glanced up, startled, only to find her daughter-in-law already rising to her feet. The room froze. Sophia's expression was sharp, her lips tight, her manicured hand already lifting. Before Martha could apologize, the slap cracked across her cheek. It wasn't a shove, not even a scolding gesture. It was deliberate, the sting echoing across Martha's skin like fire. Frank's fork clinked against his plate. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He sat stiffly, staring somewhere beyond his mother as though the crown molding had suddenly become fascinating. Ethan, poor boy, didn't breathe. His eyes stayed down, glued to his plate of untouched food. "You can't even be trusted with the simplest tasks," Sophia snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut. The words dug deeper than the slap. Martha touched her cheek, the heat of humiliation spreading faster than the burn of the strike. For 72 years she had carried herself with grace, raising students, raising her son, burying her husband with dignity. Never had she been humiliated like this, not in her own family's dining room, not in front of the people who should have defended her. She whispered, "I'm sorry," though the words felt bitter and undeserved, and she stepped back from the table. The scent of rosemary and roasted meat turned sour in her nose. She could feel her own pulse drumming in her temples as she turned and walked slowly down the hallway, each step steadier than the last. In the quiet of her room, she pressed a tissue to her cheek. It wasn't bleeding, of course. It was pride that bled, not skin. Her hands trembled as she set the tissue aside. She could hear muffled voices still coming from the dining room, but not one of them followed her. Not Frank, not Ethan, certainly not Sophia. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. A message from Helen James. "How was dinner? Survived the Queen of the Castle." Martha almost smiled. Almost. Instead, her chest tightened, and she typed nothing at first. Then her finger hovered before she wrote only 3 words. "I've had enough." She didn't send it immediately. She stared at those words, feeling them press into her chest like a final verdict. Then she hit send. The house was quiet now, save for the faint clatter of dishes being cleared away. Martha moved toward her dresser, pulling open the top drawer. Inside lay stacks of folded handkerchiefs, old jewelry boxes, and beneath them, a thick envelope tied, with a fading blue ribbon. Her fingers hesitated before she drew it out. It was her will. She hadn't looked at it in years, not since Ethan was in grade school. She had written it when Frank and Sophia were first married, back when she believed her daughter-in-law's smile, back when she thought the woman truly meant it when she said, "We're family now." Martha set the envelope on her desk, sliding a pen from the holder. The lamp's glow caught the gold edges of the papers inside. She flipped to the first page, her pulse steadying. She began scratching notes in the margins, adjustments, corrections, removals. Sophia's name appeared in places, too many places. Her hand didn't tremble anymore as she crossed them out. For the first time that evening, Martha smiled, not a broad smile, but a thin, knowing one. The kind of smile that belonged not to a victim, but to a woman finally reclaiming her power. Downstairs, Sophia laughed at something Frank said, the sound drifting faintly up the stairwell. Martha didn't flinch this time. She turned another page of her will and wrote carefully with deliberate strokes, ensuring Sophia Ellis's name would never again be written where it didn't belong. The pen scratched across the margin of Martha's old will, the black ink cutting through Sophia's name like a knife. Her hands no longer trembled. They moved with purpose, steady and sharp, as though the sting on her cheek had forged a new steadiness in her bones. She sat at her desk, a heavy oak piece that had belonged to her late husband. The lamp threw a warm circle of light, highlighting neat stacks of papers, her savings account statements, insurance policies, and the title deed to the house. The faint tick of the clock on the wall matched the rhythm of her heartbeat. For years she had treated these documents like dusty relics. Tonight they became weapons. Her phone rested beside her. She unlocked it with a slow, deliberate motion and scrolled to a name she hadn't dialed in years: Olivia Reed, attorney at law. Martha pressed call and lifted the phone to her ear. The line rang once, twice. Then came Olivia's brisk voice. "Martha Ellis, I didn't expect to hear from you." Martha's own voice sounded steadier than she felt. "I need to update my will. Urgently." There was a pause, followed by the sound of typing. "Of course. Is this about your son? Or—" Olivia hesitated, her tone sharpening. "Your daughter-in-law?" "Yes." Martha's answer cut like glass. "I want her removed. And more than that, I want to make sure she never benefits from me again." The faint rustle of papers came through the line. Olivia's voice lowered, professional yet protective. "Then we'll make certain of it. When can you meet?" "Tomorrow morning." After she hung up, Martha exhaled deeply, the sound filling the stillness of the room. She pulled the file drawer open and began sorting. Insurance papers smelled, faintly of old ink and dust. The crisp title deed to the house carried the faint chemical tang of the notary stamp. She stacked them in careful piles, each sheet a building block of her revenge. Her phone buzzed again, this time a text from Frank. "We need to talk." Dinner was a mistake. Martha stared at the words. For a fleeting second, she almost heard the boy's voice in them, the same boy who once cried in her lap after scraping his knee, who once promised her he'd take care of her when she grew old. But the man who sat silent at dinner, watching his wife strike his mother, was not that boy anymore. She set the phone face down without replying. Her hands returned to the papers, flipping through her bank statements, tracing the balance with her finger. She remembered every dollar she had saved, every year spent teaching other people's children, sacrificing new dresses, vacations, even repairs, just to build something lasting. That something was not going to line Sophia's pockets. The night stretched on. Outside her window, the suburban street lay quiet, porch lights glowing faintly, a dog barking in the distance. Inside, the only sound was the shuffle of papers and the occasional creak of the chair. Each piece of paper Martha touched seemed to strip Sophia further away from her future. Near midnight, her phone chimed again, not a message this time, but an email. Martha leaned forward, adjusting her glasses. It was from Olivia. Attached, draft of revised will. All prior beneficiaries remain, except Sophia Ellis, who is excluded from inheritance, primary beneficiary. Ethan Ellis, with stipulations regarding age and financial maturity. Please review. Martha clicked the attachment. Her eyes scanned the lines of text, her breath tightening. Sophia's name had vanished. In its place, Ethan stood strong and solitary, a legacy shielded from manipulation. Her lips curved into the faintest smile. For the first time that night, her cheek no longer burned from the slap. Sophia thought humiliation was the end of Martha's story. But as Martha set her pen to paper and began signing, the truth became clear. Humiliation was only the beginning. The morning sunlight streamed across Martha's desk, spilling over the neat stacks of documents she had laid out the night before. The golden light glinted on the rim of her coffee cup. But the warmth it promised didn't soften her mood. Her jaw was set, her back straight, her resolve unshakable. Every line of ink on the pages in front of her was a blade cutting Sophia out of her life. Olivia's draft lay open on the desk. Martha read it carefully, tracing each clause with her finger. All personal assets to be placed in trust for Ethan Ellis. Disbursement permitted upon his 25th birthday, contingent upon completion of higher education or proof of financial stability. The boy would have a future free from his mother's grasp. Martha allowed herself a small breath of satisfaction. She wasn't just protecting herself, she was protecting him. But wills weren't the only chains Sophia had been counting on. Martha reached for the next form, the power of attorney. Her name was already there, but the secondary designee had been Frank. That would no longer do. She scratched a neat line through his name and wrote instead, Helen James. Her oldest friend, sharp as ever at 73, someone who could smell deceit long before it entered a courtroom. Helen wouldn't bend under Sophia's smile or Frank's pleading. Her pen moved again, steady, deliberate. With each stroke, she felt lighter, almost as if the bruise on her cheek had faded. By mid-morning, Martha had opened the cedar chest in her bedroom, the one that carried a lifetime of mementos, silk scarves, framed photos, small jewelry boxes that held more memories than carats. She made a list, item by item, of what would be donated, what would be gifted, and what would remain in the family. The cedar's sharp scent mixed with the faint perfume still clinging to the fabric of her late husband's ties. These weren't just things. They were the pieces of her life, and she refused to let Sophia touch even one of them. Her phone buzzed again. Frank. Don't be dramatic, Mom. Let's talk. The words pressed against her like a hand at her throat, familiar and dismissive. He had said the same when he was a teenager caught lying, when he brought Sophia home after dropping out of college, when he borrowed money he never repaid. Always dismissing, always reducing her feelings to dramatic. Her fingers typed quickly, I've already spoken. Silence is my answer. She sent it without hesitation. She set the phone aside and reached for her notebook, jotting down reminders for donations. Goodwill, the church thrift shop, the community center where she had once taught reading to second graders. Each line she wrote was another piece of her life, redirected away from Sophia's reach. Later that afternoon, curiosity tugged at her. Against her better judgment, she opened Facebook. Sophia's face filled the screen, perfectly lit, perfectly posed, her smile polished into something sharp. The caption stung. Elders who don't understand modern kitchens shouldn't be in them. Some people just don't know when to retire. The post had likes and laughing emojis, little digital affirmations from Sophia's circle of friends. Martha stared at the glowing screen until the letters blurred. She closed the app with one sharp jab of her finger. For the first time in her life, she was glad her circle of friends was small but loyal. Helen wouldn't laugh at her. Olivia wouldn't mock her. And Ethan, she knew, had seen enough at that dinner table to recognize cruelty when it stared him down. The day stretched into evening. The house was quiet, though Martha could still imagine Sophia's laughter echoing faintly from the dining room. It no longer pierced her. It only reminded her why she was doing this. Her phone pinged again, an email this time. Olivia's name appeared in bold at the top. Martha opened it with a steady hand. Your revisions have been processed. The trust will be locked within 48 hours. No amendments or outside claims will be permitted once finalization occurs. Martha leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes. The last of the tension left her shoulders. Within 2 days, Sophia Ellis would be erased from her future, and Martha had never felt stronger. The antique shop smelled faintly of cedar and polished brass, a place Martha hadn't stepped into in years. Sunlight filtered through the front windows, catching on rows of glass cases filled with trinkets and keepsakes. Her hand hovered over an elegant wooden box, no larger than a loaf of bread, its lid inlaid with mother of pearl. She ran her fingers across its smooth surface. It felt delicate but unyielding, a fitting container for what she had in mind. The shopkeeper wrapped it in brown paper and twine. Beautiful piece, he remarked, handing it over. Martha smiled faintly, though her mind was already elsewhere. By the time she reached home, she knew exactly what to put inside. That afternoon, the house was unusually quiet. Sophia was out, and Frank had taken Ethan to basketball practice. Martha moved carefully through the rooms, selecting items one by one. A photograph of Frank as a boy, smiling with cake on his face at his 10th birthday. A silk handkerchief embroidered with Martha's initials, the one she'd carried in her pocket every day of her teaching years. A tiny porcelain bird figurine, chipped at the wing, that had belonged to her mother. Each piece whispered of history, of love, of permanence. She placed them gently into the box, layering tissue between them. When the box was full, she added a single handwritten note, folded twice. For you, when you realize what you lost. The message wasn't meant to be understood today, or tomorrow. It was a seed she planted, knowing that someday Sophia might stumble across it and feel the weight of what she had thrown away. By evening, the Ellis driveway glowed under the soft orange of the streetlight. Martha set the box by the front door, rang the bell once, and stepped back into the shadows of the porch. She didn't linger. She turned, walking back to her room without a word. Moments later, her phone buzzed. Frank's name lit up the screen. "Mom, please answer. We can't leave things like this." Martha stared at it, her finger hovering. Then she placed the phone face down on the dresser. He hadn't defended her. He hadn't said a word when his wife humiliated her. Now he wanted conversation? No. The muffled sound of the front door opening drifted down the hallway. Sophia's voice, sharp and dismissive, followed. "More nonsense," she muttered. "She's lost it." The door slammed shut again, the sound reverberating through the house. Martha sat on the edge of her bed, listening. Instead of anger, laughter bubbled from her chest. Low, steady, not bitter, but satisfied. She imagined Sophia tossing the box aside, never knowing it was empty of wealth but heavy with meaning. That laughter carried her as she retrieved the box from where she'd hidden its twin, the real one. The elegant wooden box Sophia dismissed so quickly had been a decoy. The true box, the one Martha cared about, rested in her safe. She placed the sentimental items back inside, spun the lock, and closed the heavy door with a click. Sophia would never touch them. Later that night, Martha sat across from Olivia Reed in her law office downtown. The space smelled faintly of paper and lemon polish, the hum of late-night traffic filtering through the tall windows. Olivia's tone was steady, her dark eyes sharp behind her glasses. "Everything's ready," Olivia said, sliding a final set of papers across the desk. "You've made your choices, and they're airtight. Sophia won't have a claim." Martha signed without hesitation, the pen steady in her hand. Each stroke felt like another door closing firmly in Sophia's face. When she returned home, the mailbox leaned open under the weight of envelopes. She sifted through the usual bills and flyers until her fingers froze on one. Frank's handwriting on the front, uneven, hurried. She slid it open with a kitchen knife. "Mom, we need to negotiate. Don't shut us out like this." Martha folded the letter slowly, her lips pressing into a thin line. Negotiation after silence. Negotiation after betrayal. She set the letter aside on her desk. For the first time in years, she felt ready for the fight. With deliberate strokes, she wrote a single sentence beneath his plea. "I'm not negotiating." When she set the pen down, she felt lighter. She picked up the phone and dialed Olivia Reed. Her attorney's tone was as crisp as always. "You're ready then?" "More than ready," Martha replied. "Good. I'll send the official notice to the bank this afternoon. Once it's processed, the title reverts fully to you. They'll have no claim." The click of Olivia's keyboard carried faintly through the receiver, sounding to Martha like the slam of a gavel. A decision made, a future rewritten. By the time she hung up, the sun had shifted across the room, bathing her desk in sharp light. She pulled a sheet of stationery from the drawer and began drafting her own message. Her handwriting was slow but steady, each loop purposeful. "This is my home. You have 30 days to vacate." The ink dried as she folded the letter and sealed it in an envelope. For a moment she stared at it, hearing only the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the ticking of the wall clock. This house had seen Christmas mornings, arguments over homework, whispered prayers beside her late husband's bed. To think Sophia had strutted through its hallways as though she owned them. It made Martha's grip tighten on the envelope until the paper bent. The notice was delivered the next morning. By evening, Frank was at her door, pale and worn from sleeplessness. He held the letter in his hand, crumpled now from being read and reread. "Mom, what is this?" His voice cracked in the middle, as if he hadn't decided whether to be angry or broken. "It's exactly what it says," Martha replied, her tone calm. 30 days. You and Sophia need to leave." He shook his head, running a hand through his thinning hair. "Why are you doing this? We're family." Family. The word rang hollow. She had waited for him to act like family the night she was slapped. He had chosen silence then. Now he wanted loyalty. "You watched," Martha said softly. "You didn't stop her. You didn't even look at me. That was the day you chose her over me. So now I choose myself." Frank's jaw worked, but no words came. When he finally turned to leave, his shoulders sagged as though something inside him had collapsed. The next weeks blurred into a rhythm of boxes and tape. Helen arrived with sharp elbows and sharper remarks. "If Sophia touches one more box like she's doing me a favor, I swear I'll trip her on the stairs." Martha laughed for the first time in days, the sound dry but genuine. Together they packed Martha's belongings, her teaching awards, her husband's navy cap, Ethan's crayon drawings from kindergarten. Each item was labeled, cataloged, and carried into storage with care. Sophia's reaction was less restrained. She stormed through the kitchen one afternoon, waving the eviction notice. "You can't do this. This house is ours. Frank's name is on everything. You're senile if you think." But when Olivia arrived with a stack of documents, Sophia's fury cracked into disbelief. "Read it," Olivia said, sliding the papers across the table. Frank never finalized the refinancing. Martha's name was never removed. Legally, this house is hers, and you, Mrs. Ellis, are a tenant. Nothing more. Frank sat silently at the table, his signature already drying on the eviction acknowledgement. His hand trembled so badly Martha wondered if the pen had nearly slipped. Sophia refused at first, but Olivia's steady gaze left her no room. At last, with a muttered curse, Sophia scrawled her name across the page. The sound of the pen scratching on paper was sweeter to Martha than any apology. 3 weeks later, the house was nearly bare. Boxes lined the garage. The living room echoed without its heavy rug. Martha stood in the doorway with Helen, watching the movers haul the last of her furniture into storage. "Strange, isn't it?" she murmured. "How quickly a house can shed its history." Helen patted her shoulder. "Not shed, protected. You kept what mattered." That night, as Martha slid the final box onto a shelf in her rented unit, her phone buzzed. A new email from Olivia lit the screen. The subject line was blunt. "Sophia Ellis v. Martha Ellis." Sophia was suing, but before dread could take hold, Martha opened the email. Olivia's message was short, confident. Counterclaim already filed. She won't win. Martha closed the phone with a steady hand. The slap had been public, but this would be the fight Sophia never saw coming. The courthouse smelled faintly of polished wood and stale coffee, its air thick with the quiet hum of tension that clung to every hallway. Martha walked slowly through the double doors of the courtroom, her cane clicking softly against the tile, though her posture was straight and proud. She wore a navy blue suit she hadn't put on since her retirement ceremony. Pressed crisp, the silver pin on her lapel glinting beneath the fluorescent lights. At her side, Olivia carried a leather briefcase, her expression sharp and unreadable. When they entered, Sophia was already there, perched beside Frank at the plaintiff's table. Sophia's dress was immaculate, her makeup flawless, her smile rehearsed. But her eyes, quick and darting, betrayed a nervous edge. Frank couldn't meet Martha's gaze. His hands fidgeted with his tie, loosening and tightening it as though he couldn't find the right balance. Ethan sat quietly in the back, a school notebook clutched in his lap, his eyes fixed on his grandmother. "All rise," the bailiff called, and the room shifted to its feet as the judge entered. He was a heavy-set man with a weary face, the kind that had seen every trick in the book and grown tired of them all. He sat down, glanced over the docket, and said simply, "Let's hear the case." Sophia was the first to speak. She leaned forward, her voice syrupy sweet, dripping with false concern. "Your Honor, we're dealing with an elderly woman who has grown confused and unstable. She doesn't understand her finances. She's being manipulated by outside influences." She flicked her gaze toward Olivia, and she is making decisions that are harmful to her own son's family. Martha didn't flinch. Olivia rose, calm and deliberate, sliding a folder across the table to the clerk. "Your Honor, this is a record of repeated verbal abuse directed at my client. Statements made by Mrs. Sophia Ellis herself, mocking and belittling Martha in her own home." She tapped another document. "Here is the original mortgage contract. Martha Ellis's name was never removed. She is the sole legal owner. No evidence exists that she transferred rights to the property. The eviction notice is valid." The judge flipped through the pages slowly. Sophia crossed her arms, her lips tightening. When Sophia was called to testify, she launched into theatrics, her voice rising, her hands gesturing wildly as she painted herself as the victim. "I took her in. I cooked for her, I cleaned, I treated her like my own mother, and this is how she repays me? Throwing us into the street?" The judge didn't even glance up from his notes. "Do you have documentation to support these claims?" Sophia faltered. "Documentation? No, but—" "Then sit down," the judge said firmly. Frank's turn came next. He shuffled to the witness stand, his shoulders slumped. He opened his mouth, but the words faltered. I just think we should talk as a family." The judge's brow furrowed. "This is a courtroom, not a family dinner table. Do you have legal grounds to contest your mother's ownership?" Frank's silence filled the room. He shook his head and stepped down. When Martha finally took the stand, her voice was calm, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "Your Honor, I spent my life working for that home. I paid the mortgage, I maintained it, and when my husband passed, I carried it alone. I invited my son and his wife in out of kindness. That kindness was repaid with humiliation." Her voice caught for the briefest second before she steadied herself. "I am not confused. I am not unstable. I am very clear about what I'm doing." The room was silent. Even Sophia didn't move. The judge leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. "The evidence is clear. The home belongs solely to Martha Ellis. She retains full control over its ownership and distribution. The eviction stands." Sophia's face drained of color. Frank bowed his head, avoiding his mother's eyes. Ethan in the back gave the faintest smile, small but steady, his hand gripping the notebook tighter. The gavel struck once. The sound echoed, final and heavy. As Martha and Olivia gathered their papers, the clerk handed over the signed judgment. The property title had been formally transferred, uncontested, into Martha's sole name. Sophia's theatrics had ended in silence, and Martha walked out with the keys, still hers. The conference room smelled faintly of leather and ink, the kind of sterile comfort that belonged only to law offices. Martha sat at the long oak table with Olivia beside her, the pile of freshly printed documents resting in front of her like a shield. The sound of her pen sliding across the paper echoed louder than any gavel she had ever heard. With each signature, she carved Sophia further out of her future. The last page was her will, revised, airtight, precise. She read the line that named Ethan as her sole heir, his inheritance locked in trust until he reached 25, protected from his parents' interference. Martha pressed the pen to the page, her hand steady as stone. The moment the ink dried, Sophia's name was gone forever. When she left the office, Olivia handed her a heavy envelope. "These are the originals," she said. "Take them somewhere safe." Martha drove to the downtown bank. The air was cool inside, carrying the faint metallic tang of polished vault doors. A young clerk escorted her into the safety deposit room, the walls lined with metal drawers that whispered permanence. She slid her documents, title deed, trust papers, final will, into her assigned box. The door shut with a metallic click, sealing away the evidence of her choice. She stepped back, exhaling slowly. It felt as though a weight had lifted from her chest, leaving only clarity behind. By the time she returned home, her phone was buzzing again. A voicemail from Frank. "Mom, please. I was wrong. I should have spoken up. I can't let this break us apart." Martha sat on the edge of her bed, listening to his voice crackle through the speaker. For a moment, her hand hovered over the call button. She thought of the little boy who once clutched her hand at school drop-offs, who used to run down the stairs on Christmas morning. But then the memory shifted. The dining room. His silence as his wife's palm struck her face. She pressed delete. The next notification came not as a voice, but as an image. A screenshot Helen had texted her, with a note. "You'll want to see this." It was Sophia's Facebook post. "Sometimes the most toxic people are the ones who raised us. Some parents never know when to let go of control." There were no likes, no comments. The post sat there, bare and ignored, the emptiness louder than any backlash. Sophia's curated world of followers and admirers had chosen silence. Martha smiled faintly. Silence could wound deeper than words. 2 days later, she met Olivia again, this time to finalize the legal filings. Olivia clicked through her laptop, confirming each form. "The trust is logged with the court, the deed is registered, and the will is notarized. They can't touch it now, Martha. You've done it." Helen, who had tagged along, reached across the table and squeezed Martha's hand. "You've done it," she echoed. "You're free." The word lingered. Free. Martha had imagined this moment for months, the day she would reclaim her dignity, not with shouts or arguments, but with ink, signatures, and sealed envelopes. She leaned back in her chair, letting the truth sink into her bones. Sophia was out. Frank had no power. Ethan's future was safe. That night, the house was quiet, as though even the walls were settling into peace. Martha brewed herself a cup of chamomile tea, the steam curling gently in the lamplight. For the first time in years, she felt safe in her own home. No footsteps stomping upstairs, no slammed cabinet doors, no barbed remarks disguised as jokes. Just silence, calm and complete. Her phone buzzed once more, shattering the peace. This time it wasn't Frank. The caller ID read, "Reed Law Office." Martha answered, her voice steady. Olivia's tone, however, was sharp. "Frank's lawyer just contacted me. They're attempting to reverse the trust." Martha's grip tightened on the phone, the porcelain cup trembling in her other hand. She had locked Sophia out, yet now Frank was pulling the handle, trying to force the door open again. And the fight was far from over. The courthouse lobby was cool and smelled faintly of disinfectant, its marble floors echoing with footsteps and whispered conversations. Martha sat on a bench outside the hearing room, Olivia beside her, a folder balanced on her knees. The folder contained the beating heart of her future, the trust documents, the airtight clauses, the iron locks Sophia couldn't pry open no matter how sharp her nails. Olivia leaned in, lowering her voice. "They tried to argue incapacity, that you weren't in your right mind. But I've reviewed every angle. The judge won't buy it. The trust is protected. No loopholes." Martha's eyes narrowed. Sophia always believed there was a back door to everything. This time, she's locked out. When the hearing began, Frank's lawyer shuffled papers and spoke with forced conviction, arguing Martha had been manipulated. Sophia sat beside him, lips pursed, her manicured fingers tapping impatiently on the table. Her eyes darted toward the judge, but the charm she relied on had no purchase here. Olivia stood with quiet authority. Your Honor, my client has acted with clarity and independence. She has the right to designate her estate as she sees fit. Here are the records of her consultations, her signatures, her instructions, every step verified. She placed the folder gently on the bench, like a final stone laid on a grave. The judge flipped through the pages, unimpressed by the dramatics on Sophia's side. At last, he closed the folder. The trust is valid. The case is dismissed. The gavel struck, sharp and final. Martha allowed herself only the faintest smile as she rose, cane clicking against the floor. Sophia, red-faced, turned on Frank, whispering furiously. He didn't answer, only rubbed at his forehead like a man with no fight left. Outside the courthouse, the autumn air was brisk, the scent of dry leaves and distant wood smoke carrying on the wind. Martha tilted her face toward the sun, breathing in the freedom she had fought for. That evening, Olivia called with the written confirmation. Martha sat at her kitchen table as Olivia's voice came through the receiver, steady and certain. It's official. All assets are earmarked for Ethan. Not Sophia, not Frank. The trust is locked. They can't touch it. Martha closed her eyes, picturing Ethan's future. A college graduation, a first apartment, a life untainted by his mother's greed. She whispered, almost to herself, he'll be safe. The next week, the ripples of her decision began to show. Sophia's shopping spree slowed. Her social media, once filled with brunches and boutique finds, now showed only recycled photos. Their mortgage payments lagged. Martha heard through Helen, who heard everything, that Sophia had been denied a store credit line she'd once wielded like a second wallet. Martha didn't gloat aloud, but there was satisfaction in knowing the strain had finally turned inward. One Friday evening, Ethan came by, his backpack slung over one shoulder. The boy had grown taller, nearly eye level with her now, but his voice still carried that quiet gentleness that had always set him apart from his parents. He sat at her kitchen table, inhaling the smell of chicken pot pie cooling on the counter. "Grandma," he said almost shyly, "I'm proud of you." Martha reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. "You'll be taken care of, my love. They won't be. That's the difference between us and them. We look after what matters." Ethan's smile was small but full of relief, as though some invisible weight had lifted from his young shoulders. Later that night, the house was still. Martha sat in her armchair, a blanket across her knees, her thoughts finally settling into calm. The trust was sealed. Her legacy was safe. For the first time in months, she let herself believe the fight was over. The call came just past midnight. Martha had been sitting in her armchair, a book open in her lap, though she hadn't turned a page in over an hour. The phone's sudden ring cut through the silence, sharp and insistent. She glanced at the screen. "Frank, again," she answered. His voice trembled. "I'm sorry, Mom. Please help us." The words hung in the dark, like smoke. He didn't sound like the man who had once sat frozen at the dinner table while Sophia struck her. He sounded like the boy who used to clutch her hand after nightmares. The rawness of it tugged at her chest, but she said nothing. "Everything's falling apart," he continued, words rushing now. "The house, the bills, Sophia's business deals, they're all gone. I tried to fix it, but I can't. We need you. I need you." His breathing cracked, a ragged sound that filled the line. Martha's silence stretched until the only thing he could hear was his own desperation echoing back. She ended the call without a word. At her desk the next morning, the early light catching the rim of her teacup, she drafted a letter to Frank. Each sentence came with the precision of a blade. "I've already given. You've taken and taken, but it ends here. It's time for you to learn how to give back. Consider this my last gift, a lesson you won't forget." She signed it, folded the paper with care, and sent it by email. The whoosh of it leaving her outbox felt like a final door slamming shut. The next attempt came not from Frank, but from Sophia. She appeared unannounced at Martha's doorstep one afternoon, her perfume arriving before her words. The air between them smelled of expensive floral notes, clashing with Martha's fresh brewed coffee. Sophia's smile was brittle. "Martha, You don't need to finish," Martha cut in, her hand still on the doorknob. Sophia shifted, her voice softening into a mimicry of contrition. "I was wrong about everything. I let stress and pride get in the way. I shouldn't have done what I did." Her eyes darted toward the window, away from Martha's gaze. Martha's grip tightened on the knob. "You slapped me in my own home and laughed while my son looked away. Forgive me if I don't mistake this for repentance." Sophia's lips parted, but no sound came. The door closed between them, the latch catching with a final click. That evening, Martha called Olivia. "It's time. I want to expand Ethan's trust, not just inheritance, his education." Within a week, the paperwork was drawn up. Martha sat across from Olivia in her office, the scent of paper and toner filling the air. She signed the new documents, securing a separate educational fund for Ethan, college tuition, housing, books, all untouchable by his parents. Olivia's tone was matter-of-fact as she slid the signed papers into a file. "Sophia won't be able to contest this either, legally barred. The boy's future is safe." For the first time in weeks, Martha let out a deep breath, the kind that comes not from relief, but from certainty. The days that followed carried a quiet satisfaction. Martha noticed Sophia's absence from the neighborhood gatherings, her absence from social media, except for recycled posts, meant to disguise the cracks forming in her world. But silence had a way of revealing more than noise. It was a Tuesday evening when Martha's phone buzzed again, this time with Ethan's name lighting up the screen. She answered immediately, warmth in her voice. "Hello, sweetheart." His voice was strained, almost hesitant. "Grandma, I need to talk to you." Martha straightened, her chest tightening. "What is it?" Ethan's breath wavered over the line. "Mom's asking for forgiveness." The words hit like a stone dropped in still water, sending ripples through Martha's calm. Forgiveness. From Sophia. And this time, it was her grandson carrying the message. The knock on Martha's door came just as the kettle began to whistle. She turned down the flame, expecting Helen, but when she opened the door, it was Ethan. His eyes were red, his hair unkempt from running a hand through it too many times. He clutched his backpack as if it might steady him. "Grandma," he said, voice cracking. "Mom says she's sorry." Martha stepped aside, letting him in. The boy dropped his bag by the door and sank into the armchair, shoulders slumped. His words rushed out in fragments. "She says she regrets everything, the slap, the court. She swears she'll change, but I don't believe it, not for a second." His hands twisted in his lap, restless. Martha crossed the room and lowered herself beside him. She wrapped her arms around him, pulling him close like she used to when he was small. His body trembled against hers. "Listen to me," she whispered, her cheek against his hair. "You're my legacy, not them, not her, you." He drew in a shaky breath, clinging to her as though afraid she might disappear. For a long moment, neither spoke. The only sounds were the quiet tick of the wall clock and the cooling hiss of the forgotten kettle. The next morning, Martha's phone buzzed. The message was short, dripping with feigned humility. "I want to make this right. Please, Martha, let's meet." Sophia's words looked softer on the screen than her hand had felt across Martha's face. Martha let the message sit unanswered, the blue notification dot glaring back at her like an uninvited guest. But Sophia wasn't finished. That evening she called. Her voice on the line was honeyed, careful. "Martha, I was wrong. I know I was cruel, and I let pride get the better of me. You've made your point. Haven't we suffered enough?" Martha's reply was flat. "Suffering isn't the same as change. You don't want forgiveness. You want access." The line went dead. Days later, Frank tried his own approach. He showed up at her door with a bunch of grocery store flowers, carnations still wrapped in crinkled plastic. He held them like a peace offering, his face pale. "Mom, please," he said, standing awkwardly in her kitchen as she arranged the flowers in a vase out of sheer habit. I let you down. I should have spoken up that night. I promise it won't happen again. Martha's hands paused over the stems, the scissors glinting in her grip. She looked at him, seeing not the man but the echo of her little boy asking forgiveness for breaking a window, but the weight of years pressed back. Some promises can't be kept, she said softly. Especially the ones you should have made when they mattered. Frank's lips parted, but no defense came. He left the flowers behind, their faint scent of dye and pesticide filling the kitchen after he walked out. That weekend, Helen arrived for tea. She wore her usual wool coat despite the unseasonably warm weather, her dry humor tucked into the smile she gave Martha. They sat at the table, sipping Earl Grey, the steam curling like ribbons between them. No more apologies from Sophia, Helen asked, stirring her cup slowly. None worth hearing, Martha replied. Helen's sharp eyes softened. Then you've already won. Stop letting their noise echo in your head. Martha nodded, though she knew noise had a way of finding its path. That evening, her prediction proved right. The mail slid through the slot with a heavy thud. Among the bills and catalogs lay a thick envelope embossed with a law firm's insignia. Martha tore it open, her hands steady. The letter inside was blunt. Sophia Ellis intends to pursue further legal action. Martha set the paper down on the table, the words staring up at her under the soft lamplight. Sophia wasn't asking anymore. She was threatening. The envelope on Martha's kitchen table bore the insignia of yet another law firm, embossed in gold. She slid it open carefully with the edge of a butter knife, bracing herself for what fresh tactics Sophia might attempt. Inside was a settlement offer. Legal jargon filled the page, but the message was simple. If Martha released part of the trust back to Frank and Sophia, they would drop their legal threats. Martha laughed, short, sharp, and joyless. A settlement was nothing more than a beggar's bowl. Wrapped in paper, she crumpled the letter and tossed it into the wastebasket. Then, with a steadiness honed over months of battles, she sat down at her desk. She pulled out her stationery, the kind she used only for moments that mattered, and wrote in long, even strokes, Sophia, you burned your bridge the night you raised your hand against me. I owe you nothing. My silence from here on out is not weakness. It is choice. Martha Ellis. She folded the paper, sealed the envelope, but never mailed it. She left it in the drawer of her desk instead, knowing Sophia would never hold it in her hands. Some messages were not meant for the recipient. They were meant for the sender. The phone rang that evening. Frank's number, then Sophia's. Neither call she answered. The phone eventually went quiet, and the house settled into its own calm once more. A week later, Ethan arrived after school, his backpack bulging with papers. He dropped it on the floor and grinned, holding up a thick envelope. Grandma, I got in. State University, full acceptance, and, look. He handed her another letter, embossed with the same seal. The scholarship committee approved. Between this and the trust you set up, I won't need to worry. Martha's throat tightened. She pulled him into her arms, breathing in the faint scent of his cologne mixed with teenage sweat and notebook paper. I told you, Ethan, she whispered. You'll be taken care of. Always. For the first time in months, her heart swelled not with defiance, but with pride. Meanwhile, Sophia's world crumbled piece by piece. Helen delivered the updates like morsels over afternoon tea, her tone almost gleeful. They filed for bankruptcy. Creditors are lining up. Frank's name is on 3 loans I'd never even heard about. Sophia's boutique card was frozen last week. She stirred her tea slowly, her eyes flashing. It's all unraveling. Martha listened quietly, hands folded over her lap. She didn't need to gloat. She had already won. But the cracks became more visible as weeks turned into months. Sophia's glossy social media updates disappeared. Her posts grew sparse, replaced by recycled vacation pictures and hollow quotes about resilience. The silence beneath them was deafening. No likes, no comments. Her followers had moved on, just as Martha had. One evening, Ethan hesitated as he packed up his books. "Grandma," he said carefully, "is the trust safe? I don't want Mom and Dad to try to take it away from me." Martha touched his hand, her voice steady. "The trust is ironclad. They can't touch it. What's yours will remain yours. They'll never take your future, Ethan. Not while I'm still here." He nodded, his shoulders easing. "I believe you." And he should, because she had built her entire defense around that promise. The next morning, Martha was pulling weeds in the small garden by her porch when Helen hurried across the lawn, newspaper folded under her arm. "Have you seen this?" she asked, thrusting the paper into Martha's hands. The headline stretched across the front page. "Local family forced to sell home amid bankruptcy proceedings." Beneath it was a photo of Frank and Sophia's house, the one they had once flaunted as their crown jewel. A foreclosure sign stood crooked in the front yard. Martha held the paper, the faint smell of ink and newsprint rising to her nose, and read the caption twice before setting it down. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Not a smile, not pity, just quiet acknowledgement. Sophia Ellis had spent years trying to strip Martha of her dignity. Now she was stripped of the very roof over her head. And the unraveling was far from finished. The moving truck rumbled down the street like a slow drumbeat of defeat. From her upstairs window, Martha watched the men haul box after box from Frank and Sophia's house, their once pristine front lawn now scattered with taped cardboard, broken down furniture, and the remnants of a life they had tried so hard to make look untouchable. The for sale sign, tilted and streaked from rain, stood in the yard like a gravestone. Sophia barked orders at the movers, her sharp voice carrying across the quiet neighborhood. Even now she wore heels, though they sank into the damp grass. Frank stood off to the side, his shirt untucked, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, staring at nothing. Their glossy facade had cracked completely, and now the world could see through. Martha sipped her tea, the steam fogging the glass of her window for just a moment. Her smile was small, but it was there. Justice didn't always arrive with trumpets. Sometimes it arrived in the sound of tape being ripped from cardboard boxes. That afternoon, Ethan arrived at her doorstep, his sneakers wet from the drizzle outside. He held a large envelope, the kind every high school senior dreamed of receiving. "Grandma," he said breathlessly, eyes wide, "I got in." She led him inside, her heart already pounding with pride. He tore open the envelope, the paper crackling. Inside was the letter that would change his future, acceptance to an Ivy League school, scholarship fully funded. They covered everything, he whispered, scanning the page, his hands trembling. Tuition, housing, books, all of it. Martha pulled him into her arms, her chest swelling with relief. "You earned this, Ethan. Every late night, every test, every paper, you did this." But in her heart, she knew her role had been to clear the path, to shield him from the chaos his parents had created. News traveled fast. Helen appeared the next day with her usual knowing smirk. "I heard about Ethan," she said, setting down a pie on the kitchen counter. "And I heard about Frank and Sophia. Bankruptcy's official now. Creditors are circling, their debts are deeper than they let on." Martha's expression didn't change, but she felt a quiet satisfaction. "They thought they could drown me. Instead, they're the ones gasping for air." Still, the work wasn't finished. Olivia met her later that week, bringing another stack of legal documents. The conference room smelled faintly of toner and polished wood, the kind of smell that came with endings. "These are the final filings," Olivia said, sliding them across the table. "Sophia's name has been removed from every last piece of your estate, trust, and property. It's done." Martha signed each page carefully, the pen scratching across the paper like the last nails being driven into a coffin. When it was over, she sat back, a sense of finality settling in her chest. That night, she returned home and opened the family address book that had lived in her desk drawer for decades. She flipped through the pages where birthdays, anniversaries, and phone numbers were scrawled in her careful handwriting. When she reached the page that read Sophia Ellis, she pressed her pen firmly across the name, drawing a single dark line through it. It wasn't anger, it wasn't even vengeance. It was closure. For weeks, Martha moved through her days with a peace she hadn't felt in years. She cooked, gardened, and spent afternoons with Ethan as he prepared for the life ahead of him. The house felt lighter, free of the shadows that had once haunted it. But shadows had a way of finding cracks. One evening, as Ethan sat at the kitchen table reviewing college forms, his phone buzzed. He glanced down at the screen, his face tightening. "It's Mom," he muttered. Martha watched as he stared at the glowing screen, torn. The call rang and rang. Finally, he let it fade into silence. He set the phone down with a heavy sigh, refusing to look up. Martha reached for her teacup, her hand steady, though her pulse quickened. Sophia wasn't done. Not yet. And now she was reaching for Ethan. The journal lay open on Martha's dining table, its leather cover worn from years of use. Morning sunlight streamed through the curtains, painting golden stripes across the page where her neat handwriting marched in rows. She had begun calling it her memoir, though she hadn't admitted that aloud. It was more than memories, it was her account of survival, her record of what it meant to stand tall when others tried to strike her down. Ethan arrived just after 10, his backpack slung low on his shoulder, hair damp from the drizzle outside. He hesitated in the doorway, taller than the boy she remembered, but carrying the same uncertainty in his eyes. "You wanted to see me." Martha gestured to the chair across from her. "Sit down." She slid a plain envelope toward him. His name was written across the front in her careful cursive. "This is for you. Not to open now, but someday." He picked it up gently, his fingers brushing the edge like it might crumble. He looked back at her, wordless. "It's my final message for now," she explained. "Not the last, but the one I want you to carry into your future. A reminder that you were never just an afterthought in this family. You were the plan." Ethan's throat tightened. He reached for her hand across the table, his palm warm, calloused from basketball. In that moment, the silence between them spoke louder than words. After that day, Ethan became a regular presence again. He stopped by after classes, sometimes bringing his laptop and college applications, other times just to sit with her over tea. They walked the neighborhood on crisp afternoons, brittle leaves crunching under their shoes, the air tinged with smoke from fireplaces. He spoke about professors who pushed him hard, a library so big he could get lost in it, classmates who assumed he belonged there even when he doubted himself. Martha listened, proud, knowing the trust she had created had given him space to dream without fear of collapse. Money no longer hovered like a storm cloud over his choices. Sophia tried to make her presence known, of course. She posted carefully staged photos online, lattes beside laptops, captions cloaked in self-pity. Some in-laws confuse control with care. Some gifts aren't gifts at all. The post drew no replies, no sympathy. The silence was its own verdict. Martha didn't bother responding. Instead, she returned to her journal. One line, written late one night, she underlined twice. "I didn't raise my daughter-in-law. I raised my son, and he raised her." The truth, captured in black ink, steadied her hand. Spring came quickly, the air sharp with pollen and rain. Ethan's acceptance turned into scholarships, and then came the news she had long suspected. He had been named valedictorian. He tried to shrug it off, but Martha saw the spark in his eyes. The gymnasium on graduation day smelled of floor wax and carnations. Folding chairs squeaked as families shifted in their seats. Martha sat in the front row with Helen and Olivia, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. When Ethan stepped to the podium, tassel brushing his cheek, the microphone squealed before settling into silence. He didn't boast. His words were simple, steady. He thanked his teachers, his friends, and then, looking straight at her, his grandmother. "She taught me the difference between giving up and giving on," the audience murmured. a ripple of quiet respect passing through the crowd. Martha felt her chest swell, pride pushing against the walls of her rib cage until she thought she might burst. Afterward, in the parking lot, thick with the smell of hot asphalt and popcorn from a concession stand, Ethan pressed his forehead lightly to hers. "You made this possible," he said, his voice breaking. "No," she whispered. "I just made sure no one could take it away." But the truth was bigger than that. Weeks earlier, in Olivia's office, Martha had signed one last set of documents. Not just the trust, not just the will, something larger. She had created a literacy scholarship in town, funded by her home after her lifetime. A gift to children she would never meet, a lock Sophia could never pick. Olivia had called it brilliant. Helen called it ruthless. Martha called it peace. Summer arrived in a rush. Ethan packed for orientation, the house filling with the smell of detergent and cardboard. Martha moved slowly through her rooms, touching the edges of her life, the photo frames, the china, the quilt on her bed, feeling lighter than she had in decades. One humid evening, as cicadas buzzed like a chorus outside, she sat at her table with a glass of iced tea. Her journal lay open beside her, pages filled with the story of a woman who refused to be erased. Her phone buzzed against the wood. A message preview glowed in the lamplight. "Sophia, can we please talk?" The glass in Martha's hand trembled slightly, condensation running down her wrist. She set it down, staring at the words, the past pressing up against her present once again. Sophia wasn't finished. The apology arrived on a Sunday morning, not by letter or phone call, but plastered across Facebook. Sophia's profile picture beamed, though her eyes were red-rimmed, staged just enough to seem raw. The caption stretched on, talk of healing, stress, and regret. She tagged Frank, she tagged Ethan, she tagged Martha. Martha read it at the kitchen table while her kettle hissed behind her. The words smelled false, like cheap perfume sprayed over mildew. She didn't bother responding. Her phone pinged. A text from Ethan. "Don't worry, I'll handle it." Within an hour, the tag disappeared from his profile, the post tucked into the void of ignored apologies. He didn't clap back online. He simply erased it. Martha allowed herself a small smile. Silence sometimes struck harder than any rebuttal. Meanwhile, Frank found lifelines from the wider Ellis family. Cousins who hadn't spoken to Sophia in years slipped him small offerings. A month's rent covered, groceries dropped off, a spare job interview passed along. Martha let it happen. It wasn't her battle anymore. If her son was finally learning to stand without Sophia propping him up, so be it. But Sophia wasn't finished. She arrived unannounced 2 days later, her car idling at the curb. She wore a cream coat and sunglasses, as if overdressed for a gray Illinois afternoon. She rang the bell and steadied her face into practiced sorrow. When Martha opened the door, the smell of perfume clashed with the lemon and sugar from a cake cooling in the kitchen. "I'm here to apologize," Sophia said, voice thin, eyes darting. "I know I was wrong." Martha studied her without moving. "You're here because you've run out of angles." Sophia blinked, lips trembling. "I'm trying, Martha. Please." "No," Martha said, her tone calm and even. "You're performing." The door closed quietly. Sophia's reflection lingered in the glass, then vanished. Inside, Martha returned to the cake. It was her birthday. She planned to spend it with peace, a phone call from Helen, maybe a walk to share a slice with her neighbor down the hall. She zested a lemon, the air bright with citrus, and thought about how different this year felt. No tension simmering under the roof. No shadow waiting in the dining room. Just a woman, her kitchen, and the freedom she had earned. The mail brought brighter news. A thick envelope for Ethan. He tore it open at her table, breath catching. "Grandma, it's the Scholars Program. Full ride to law school if I keep my GPA. It's all here." Martha's chest swelled. She pulled him close, smelling the faint mix of detergent and autumn air on his hoodie. "Then you've won twice," she said. "First, by earning it. Second, by proving them wrong. Later that evening, Olivia called. The scholarship fund paperwork is filed. The Literacy Foundation is listed as beneficiary to your home after your life estate. No one, not Frank, not Sophia, can contest it. Good, Martha said. Locks should keep thieves tired. Happy birthday, Martha, Olivia added warmly. Martha set the phone down, her kitchen bathed in lamplight. She plated a slice of her cake, poured tea, and took her first bite. It was soft, tangy, sweet. She thought of all the birthdays when celebration had felt fragile, one sharp word away from ruin. Not tonight. Tonight was hers. The bell rang. She wasn't expecting anyone. The chime came twice, insistent. At the door stood Sophia, her coat pulled tight, clutching a silver gift bag stuffed with tissue paper. Her voice cracked as she spoke. Please, I know I don't deserve it, but I'm asking. Martha didn't answer. From the living room, Ethan appeared, drawn by the sound. He stepped beside her, taller now, steady in a way that reminded her of his grandfather. Mom, he said flatly, go home. Sophia's hand trembled as she extended the bag. Ethan glanced inside, an old photo of him as a child, framed, a note tucked behind it. He set it back into the tissue and placed the bag on the porch rail. Not like this, he said. Sophia's breath hitched, but no words came. She turned, heels clicking sharp against the pavement. The car engine coughed, then faded down the street. Martha shut the door, her hand steady on the knob. Through the glass, the silver bag gleamed under the porch light, untouched. Sophia had come searching for love. She left, as always, with nothing. The auditorium buzzed with restless excitement, the smell of flowers and fresh paper programs thick in the air. The stage shimmered under hot lights, rows of caps and gowns filling the space like a tide about to crest. Martha sat quietly near the front, her hands folded over her lap, her heart steady but alive with pride. Ethan's name echoed through the microphone. He crossed the stage with the ease of someone who had fought his way here. Not through shortcuts, but through grit and discipline. His tassel brushed against his cheek as he accepted the diploma. His posture tall, his smile small but true. The applause rose around him, loud, bright, and deserved. Martha smiled, her eyes glistening. This moment wasn't just his, it was hers. A thread pulled through decades of sacrifice and patience, through the humiliation of that night at the dining table, through every document she signed to make sure her grandson would never pay for someone else's greed. Her legacy walked across that stage. She glanced across the rows of parents, scanning for the one person who might still try to steal this moment. Sophia wasn't there. The seat reserved in her name remained empty, a silent admission of defeat. For once, she hadn't dared to show her face. Outside, the summer heat pressed down, cicadas singing in the trees. Families clustered in the parking lot, hugging, taking pictures, shouting over the sound of cars starting and horns honking. Martha stood just beyond the crowd, leaning lightly on her cane, watching Ethan with his classmates. He laughed easily, his voice blending with theirs, free in a way she had never seen before. Movement caught her eye. Across the street, Frank stood watching. He wasn't smiling, not exactly, but when their eyes met, he lifted his hand in a tentative wave, a gesture more of acknowledgement than celebration, as if to say, I see you, even if I lost you. Martha held his gaze for a moment. Then she turned her head deliberately, her steps slow but certain, her shoulders relaxed as she walked away. She had no more energy for the man who had stayed silent when she needed him most. Some bonds frayed until they were threads, and some threads weren't worth tying again. Later that evening, when the house was quiet and the sun had sunk low enough to paint the sky a deep lavender, Martha sat in her armchair with a blanket across her knees. Her phone buzzed. A message lit up the screen. Grandma, I'm proud of you. Ethan's words pulled a warmth through her chest that no courtroom victory or legal document ever had. She pressed her thumb gently against the glass, as though she could touch him through the message itself. Her eyes drifted to the journal on the side table, open to her latest entry. She had written it the night before the ceremony, when memories of the past had crept in with unusual sharpness. Peace doesn't come from being spared. It comes from surviving the break and choosing to stand again. She leaned back, listening to the crickets outside, the hum of a lawnmower somewhere down the street, the faint tick of the old wall clock. The world was ordinary again, safe, hers, and in that quiet, Martha allowed herself the final truth. She slapped me in front of everyone. I made sure she'd never sit at my table again.